This week, we're talking about Rahab. We're going to look at the life of Rahab. Rahab is one of those that I wish I could spend time hearing from you first to hear what you think of her before I start talking, because it's likely that you've heard of her and maybe you have some ideas attached to her. We can kind of already say her name like it's Rahab the prostitute. It's rare that you hear her name without the label of what her profession was. But in keeping with what I like to do, I like to bring you into the narrative, into the story in every way that I can. I'm a girl who loves a good story. I want to know what the characters are feeling, what the air feels like, what the land looks like, what their food tastes like. So if I spend like an inordinate amount of time on those details, that's why. I just want you to know that these are real people with real lives that we're talking about. I think sometimes Bible stories can feel a little bit like old myths or folklore or these imagined allegories to teach us something, but this is real. These women are real. They're as real as you living in your home, going to your job, making your choices day to day, or the women in our history in World War II, or however far back you want to go. This is real archaeological evidence, real. Rahab was a real woman living in the city of Jericho sometime around 40 years after the Exodus. This is about 120 years after the story of the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, Bithiah, Jochebed, and Miriam that we heard about last week. Rahab lives in Jericho, which is one of the oldest Mediterranean region cities in the nation of Canaan. It's on the Jordan River, and it's built up on this small mound of earth. So Jericho looks over the Jordan River Valley a bit, and Rahab is working in this city as a prostitute. It's a very vibrant, wealthy trade city. The book of Joshua tells us that her house was built into the outer wall of the city, and that she had a window that looked out, not over the city, but out over the countryside. She has a profession that isn't admirable. No little girl that I know of grows up saying that she wants to be a prostitute, but here she is. She's living in a culture that places a generally low value on women. She's in a profession that really isn't a life-enriching one for her. It's her trade. It's not great, but it's where we find her. Joshua has taken over the leadership of the Israelites after Moses' death. So he's in charge of taking the Israelites over the Jordan into the Promised Land. And by now, this is a massive group of people, at least tens of thousands of Israelites, and they're right there on the other side of the Jordan. And so Joshua wants to see what they're up against, knowing that he's going into the Promised Land. He wants to know, what are we up against? So he sends 2 spies. So we're going to start in the book of Joshua, chapter 2, verse 1. So if you want to turn there, that's where our story begins tonight. Joshua 2:1. And Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men secretly from Shittim as spies, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." And they went and came into the house of a prostitute whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. Okay, so this is it. This is the big moment that they've all been waiting for 40 years to go into the Promised Land. Joshua chooses 2 men to go over into Jericho on just the other side of the Jordan to spy out the land, and they end up directly in Rahab's house. So whether or not they were there for her services, we don't know, but we do know that it takes 1 sentence to get from Shittim to Rahab's house. And the men from Shittim don't have a great reputation when it comes to faithfulness. If you want, you can put your finger in Joshua and turn to Numbers 25, or you can just listen. Numbers 25:1 says, "While Israel lived in Shittim, the people began to whore with the daughters of Moab. These invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. So Israel yoked himself to the Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel." So imagine the ancient reader knowing that Israel is already prone to wander. 1 sentence from Shittim to prostitutes, and here we see it again. 2 men from Shittim in the land of people who don't worship God. Is it going to be different this time? Has Israel learned anything? And we don't know why or how they ended up at Rahab's house immediately. That word for lodged has multiple meanings, but maybe her house was an inn of some kind. We don't know, but what we do see in this story is that by the end of this, we will know the character of these men and the character of Rahab. Rahab is living in a city where they definitely do not serve God, and not in like a mild way. Jericho was a wicked, wicked city in Canaan. They do horrible things in the name of worshiping Baal. The nation was characterized by their terrible things. Sex was a part of their worship. Babies were buried alive. As John MacArthur said, they were a cancer on human society. What God is about to inflict on Jericho is an act of his judgment. One historian said, the destruction of the Canaanites was as great a gain to the welfare of humanity from a purely social view as any other way. The cruelties and abominations of heathenism practiced by those people required punishment and resulted in a deserved destruction. So God punishes sin. And here in this sin city sits a woman with her eyes on Israel. We'll see in a few verses how the word has traveled about that crazy multitude of people who are wandering the desert and how powerful they are. The stories of Egypt and of the Exodus have traveled to Jericho, and she's heard of them. Their God who rescues them out of misery, and the God who will find a way to preserve his people. A God who judges, yes, but also a God who saves his people. God who is both. And while the city literally shakes in its boots, Rahab says, I want to serve a God like that. Who will rescue me from this madness? Who will deliver me from this body of death? Maybe their God. And so I don't know what your testimony is, but God's rescue is available, active, and ready. Rahab understood something about God that I think we struggle to understand today. God is not taking applications for those who might be good enough to be in his family. We know that already from the women we've studied. His name and renown and fame spreads far and wide so that those who hear might say, could this God be for me too? Could a God who rescues a nation of people who complain and sin and who stays faithful to those people even when they question and doubt, he redeems them out of darkness and despair. Could he possibly be for me too? Could he possibly have good for me too? My mess, my disaster, my fears and my mistakes. And the resounding answer is yes, yes, yes. Listen, it took me years to understand this. For the first chunk of my early faith life, up until I was about 22, I understood that God loved sinners. Like I understood it in an intellectual way. God loves sinners. But I think a part of me thought that he wanted an A team for his people. Like he loved sinners, but he really wanted like the pros. So as far as everyone else was concerned, I played that part. I knew performance. I knew the right words to say. I knew the right songs to sing. I read the books. I lived a decent life. And so it really, for me, wasn't an absurd question to ask, could God have good for me too? Could God love me? Because I thought, sure, why not? I'm a good option. Like, seems like a good choice. But then my world crashed down, as life tends to do. At 20, I had a very dear friend who I served in full-time ministry with. He died of cancer when he was 20 years old, believing to the end that God would heal him. And then he died. I burned myself out in full-time ministry, traveling by the age of 21. I gained 40 pounds in 4 months. I was incredibly depressed. And I felt like God had swindled me. I felt like he cheated me and tricked me, that I was faithful, and that this is what he repaid me with. And then at 22, I had a massive moral failure. I was caught in an affair with a married man. I lost my whole ministry, trips planned international, CDs recording, all those sorts of things. It all crumbled. I was humiliated and extremely lost, and I ran. For years, I ran. I got into a bad marriage that I had no business being in, and shortly after my daughter was born, I was then abandoned and left as a single mom. And so from age 20 to 26, I had tasted death, adultery, and my own choices and others' choices, depression, sin, date rape, different kinds of abuse, anxiety, shame, divorce. And at 26, I was a single mom thinking, what just happened? Where did my life go? How did I screw it up this badly? It's like when I give my son some chalk or markers. Moms will understand this. And then I leave the room for like 2 minutes. And then I come back and there's literally chalk everywhere. Like on things that I didn't even know you could write on. This just happened the other day. And then there's food that's appeared out of nowhere. And I'm like, where did you find that cheese? We haven't had that kind of cheese in our house in months. Where did you find it? What just happened? And for me, I tell people that it felt like after all those years that someone turned the lights on in my life. And I looked around and I only saw destruction. I heard a friend describe it as night vision. Like you think you can see in the dark and your eyes adjust, but really you're not seeing anything. And when the lights come on, you can see. I saw bodies of people who I had hurt in the wake of my sin. I saw grief that I had never felt. I saw sin that I had yet to repent for. I saw my own blood marking every door frame. And I really felt like God was like, you done? Are you done now? And I remember sitting under the teaching of Matt Chandler at the Village Church after this all happened, and I felt like someone had literally inoculated me with truth. I was sick. I was sick spiritually, weak spiritually. I was malnourished. I felt incapable of finding my way to any semblance of what normal should look like now. And Chandler preached the gospel clear, like a lighthouse on a dark ocean when I was trying to find shore, like a bell ringing in the pitch of night. This way, turn this way. And I remember telling a friend, if this is true, if I'm understanding the gospel correctly, then this is actually the best news I have ever heard. This is very, very good news. And she laughed because she was like, yes, that is the point. And so listen, I get Rahab. I had heard the stories. And I wanted to know if this God who moved mountains and seas for others would spare me. Could I possibly be seen and loved and wanted anymore after the world had used me, abused me, and spit me back out? Was I worth anything with all of my stains, my scarlet letters, my rags, my stories, my darkness? I had been the good girl, and I felt like it didn't work out. But now, I lived on the edge of society, on a wall of shame, and wondered, what business does God have with a woman like me? But God does have a plan for a woman like me. Joshua 2. And it was told to the king of Jericho, behold, men of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land. Then the king of Jericho sent to Rahab, saying, bring out the men who have come to you, who entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. And she said, true, the men came to me, but I did not know where they were from. And when the gate was about to be closed at dark, the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them. Okay, so these Israelite spies are not that great at their job. They were immediately discovered. And Jericho is on alert, so the king is scared. Israel is this massive amount of people, and they are just on the other side of the Jordan River. The king of Jericho sends some messengers to Rahab's house because someone saw the 2 men come into her house, and the messengers say, bring them out. The king demands this. And Rahab acts in a way that we've already seen some women do. In an effort to honor God first and to serve him first, she denies the king of the land, and she lies to the messengers. This is now the second time in this series of women that we see women lie to someone in authority to preserve the life of another. This isn't a rule. This is descriptive, not prescriptive, just a reminder. There's reasons here. Rachel Pardon last week talked about the difference between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. So now Rahab could have told the truth and honored the 9th commandment, But she understands this, what Jesus says in Matthew 22:37. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So all of the horizontal commandments, the ones that aren't about how we respond to God, are about how we treat each other, right? So Rahab had a choice: tell the truth and put the entire nation of Israel at risk of failure in taking Jericho by fearing the king of Jericho, or love God first, fear God the most, and lie. She opted for the latter. Now, would God have somehow provided for Israel if she didn't lie? Yeah, of course, probably. There was also a custom at that time that if someone was lodging in your home, it was your responsibility to protect them and honor them in that way. So, for whatever reason she did it, she lied. Joshua 2:6. But she had brought them up to the roof and hid them with the stalks of flax that she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued after them on the way to the Jordan as far as the fords, and the gate was shut as soon as the pursuers had gone out. So verse 8, before we get to it, it's a little bit of a flashback scene. Verses 8 through 14 are a little bit of a flashback. So before she hid them under the flax, side note, flax is used to make linen. It's one of the early crops of the harvest season. This is early springtime. And the flax would have been laid on the roof to dry. They had flat roofs. And so she's got these piles of grain on her rooftop, and she hides them underneath. But not before she makes her deal. Joshua 2:8. Before the men lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, I know that the Lord has given you the land and that the fear of you has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land melt away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the two kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you devoted to destruction. And as soon as we heard it, our hearts melted, and there is no spirit left in any man because of you. For the Lord, your God, he is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that as I have dealt kindly with you, you will also deal kindly with my father's house, and give me a sure sign that you will save alive my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death. And the men said to her, our life for yours, even to death. If you do not tell this business of ours, then when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. Let's look at those words as she says. She says, I know that the Lord has given you the land. Fear of you has fallen on us, meaning Jericho. We heard how the Lord dried the Red Sea. She gives zero credit to the nation of Israel. She knows who did this work. And she says, for the Lord, your God is God. She places her faith in their God. She makes it clear, I know who you are. I know what you can do. And while we fear you as a nation, it's because of your God. Listen, do you have confidence in God like this? Or do you see things that the Lord has done and explain them away by human strength, coincidence, your control, your ability to make things happen, a good savings account, doctors, you name it? Or do you say, yeah, kings were defeated, waters split, but only because of the Lord who is God? I think we've become such a self-dependent society that we forget that God is not passive or backseat. We do not need him to take the wheel when our lives spin out of control because we never held the wheel in the first place. We need to look to him and say, all of this, every good and perfect gift, every provision, every single moment is only by the Lord. Rahab had nothing to lose in her own life. She was dead either way. Dead to her city, who had rejected her. Dead to the king, who would soon find out that she lied. Dead to Israel, who would destroy her once they charged the city. There's only one hope for a woman who has no other option. She needed a God who could rescue people out of impossible circumstances. And so she asks them, she says, I've dealt kindly with you. Will you do the same for my father and my mother, my brothers and my sisters, and their families, and deliver us all from what we know is certainly coming? She's not even asking for herself first. She's saying, will you deal kindly with my father and mothers? She's not valued her life very highly in this equation, but she's hoping. The men agree, our life for yours, they say, even unto death. This is such a beautiful line for me. I love that. They say, when the Lord gives us the land, we will deal kindly and faithfully with you. These men model the character of God to her. These men aren't there to use her. They're not laying down in her bed. They're not leaving money on her dresser. They're putting their lives on the line for her. So she sends the king's pursuers on their way, and then she goes back to the roof. She gets the men, and then we find them in Joshua 2:15. Then she let them down by a rope through the window, for her house was built into the city wall so that she lived in the wall. And she said to them, go into the hills, or the pursuers will encounter you, and hide there 3 days until the pursuers have returned. Then afterward you may go your way. The men said to her, we will be guiltless with respect to this oath of yours that you have made us swear. Behold, when we come into the land, you shall tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down. And you shall gather into your house your father and mother, your brothers, and all your father's household. And then if anyone goes out of the doors of your house into the street, his blood shall be on his own head, and we shall be guiltless. But if a hand is laid on anyone who is with you in the house, his blood shall be on our head. But if you tell this business of ours, then we shall be guiltless with respect to your oath that you have made us swear. And she said, according to your words, so be it. She sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. This is something like straight out of a movie. They make this oath to her. When we return, gather anyone in your house, and they will be spared. Tie the scarlet cord in the window so we can remember which house is yours, and we'll make sure you're spared. If anyone leaves the house, they die, and it's not our fault. If you talk about this and die, it's not our fault. But if you tie this cord, we will pass over you. Rahab, who has heard the stories of Egypt, who has heard of the Pharaoh who had enslaved these people, and then God sets them free. How one night those Israelites painted blood on their doors and they were spared from death. Rahab in faith ties a scarlet cord out her window, a blood red mark that says, pass over us, please. Spare us. By the red that you see, protect us. This is an incredible, beautiful, faithful act. She immediately ties the cord. She doesn't even wait. She doesn't think about it. She leaves it in her window and then turns her eyes towards Israel. The men leave and return to Joshua in a few days' time, and the siege of Jericho begins immediately. There, in one small house on the edge of the city, hangs a scarlet rope, hoping that the promise that was made and the refuge inside will hold secure. I'm going to skip ahead to Joshua 5. Joshua 5:13. Joshua is preparing to encircle Jericho, and he looks toward the city, and this is what happens. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? And he said, no, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said, what does my Lord say to his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Does that sound familiar? Joshua is met by the commander of the army of the Lord, similar person to who we see meet Hagar, who meets Moses. This is the pre-incarnate Christ who shows up to Joshua, prepared to completely destroy Jericho by God's power. And then Joshua says, are you for us or them? And the commander of the Lord's army says, no. Which I wish I could say that to my kids sometimes. Can we have this or that? No, it doesn't work. He doesn't say, you guys for sure, because one of his own is one of the adversaries looking through a window in that city's wall with her family huddled and waiting inside, because her God is also Joshua's God. God is for God. Joshua needs to be for God. Rahab needs to be for God, and the Lord will deliver them. The kingdom of God can no longer be an us and them. It's not a football game. We don't go to God and say, God, are you for us or for them? Are you for the Democrats or the Republicans? Are you for the people in the city or for the farmers? Are you for the men or for the women? God says, no. God is not for us in the way that we think he is. God is for himself, which then, because he is for himself, he is for us. And those who want to be with him are his and will be held by him, no doubt. But God isn't in this for Joshua's glory or for Israel's glory or for Rahab's glory. He's in this for his glory. Why? Because his glory is what ultimately brings us the most joy and happiness. We, as humans, can't handle glory in any measure on ourselves. We're destroyed when earthly glory falls on us. We can't handle it. We're corrupt, self-centered, prideful people who can't handle an ounce of real glory pointed our way. We can't even take compliments without either becoming arrogant or operating in insecurity that denies the truth. But God can be praised and say, yes, everything you say is true, and it's not arrogant of him at all. I think I've heard this in the past and thought, wow, God kind of sounds like an arrogant jerk. Like, we don't like people who do that. Right? People who crave all the attention, we don't want to be around those people. But God knows when he is glorified, when the end points to him, then we can enjoy him fully. I'm going to read you an excerpt from C.S. Lewis's Reflections on the Psalms, which helped me immensely when this was a stumbling block for me. C.S. Lewis wrote this: "The miserable idea that God should in any sense need or crave for our worship like a vain woman wanting compliments, even if such an absurd deity can be conceived, he would hardly come to us, the lowest of rational creatures, to gratify his appetite. I thought of it in terms of compliment, approval, or the giving of honor. I had never noticed that all enjoyment spontaneously overflows into praise. The world rings with praise. Lovers praising their mistresses, readers their favorite poet, walkers praising the countryside. Praise of weather, wines, dishes, actors, motors, horses, flowers, mountains, rare stamps, rare beetles, even sometimes politicians or scholars. Praise almost seems to be inner health made audible. I had not noticed either that just as men spontaneously praise whatever they value, so they spontaneously urge us to join them in praising it. Isn't she lovely? Wasn't it glorious? Don't you think that magnificent? The psalmists, in telling everyone to praise God, are doing what all men do when they speak of what they care about. I think we delight to praise what we enjoy because the praise is not merely expresses but completes the enjoyment. It is its appointed consummation. It is not out of compliment that lovers keep on telling one another how beautiful they are. The delight is incomplete until it is expressed. God is for himself because he knows that our enjoyment will be complete when we can see him and what he does fully and let it find its appointed consummation in praise. Our delight in God is incomplete until it is expressed. Our wonder at his glory is incomplete until it points back to him. It cannot end with us pointing at us or resolving on us. The Westminster Catechism says, man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. This is what it means that he gets the glory. He gets the praise, because that's where our joy bubbles over, doubles over, resolves into. That's where our security is, and that's where the battle is won. So it's not Rahab who wins the battle or Joshua who wins the battle. And Joshua asks God, are you for us or them? And God says, I'm for me. That's going to bring joy for everyone. I'm about to bring you and one of your adversaries together for my glory. I'm going to use all of this to glorify my name. For about a week, Israel marches around Jericho. Every day, they pass that red cord. Every day, Rahab watches them. Will they uphold their end of the deal? Joshua 6:15. On the seventh day, they rose early at the dawn of the day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. It was only on that day that they marched around the city 7 times. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. But you keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction, lest when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. But all silver and gold and every vessel of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Then they devoted all in the city to destruction, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys with the edge of the sword. Joshua knows Rahab's name. I love this because it means the spies weren't being sneaky. They weren't just trying to hide something and keep a secret or disobey God. They took it to Joshua. And Rahab is now protected by an army of men. Do you see this? For years, Rahab has been used by men in the four walls of her own home, and now she is protected by an army of them. For years, she was bought and forgotten, scorned and ignored by men who shared a bed with her the night before and the next day ignored her in the city street. But now, there is an army of them, armed with her name, now on their mouth for only one reason: not pleasure, but protection; not commodity, but provision. When godly men rise up and serve the Lord, women thrive, survive, and flourish. As Kevin said a couple of weeks ago, where biblical manhood is healthy, women flourish. What kind of God does this? What kind of God turns what used to be a den of sin within her home, a place where her hopes and dreams went to die, into a place of renewed life, a place of protection, a place of promise and resurrection? What kind of God turns a tomb into a womb? Our God, Joshua's God, Rahab's God. Joshua 6:22. But to the two men who had spied out the land, Joshua said, "Go into the prostitute's house, bring out from there the woman and all who belong to her, as you swore to her." So the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and mother and brothers and all who belonged to her. And they brought all her relatives and put them outside the camp of Israel. And they burned the city with fire and everything in it. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and of iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. But Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. And she has lived in Israel to this day because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho. Imagine this moment. The city is in chaos. People are running for their lives in fear. But two men who made a promise open the door and cover her. She is in the city. She is no longer of the city. She's no longer a resident of Jericho. Her allegiance, her promised protection, her safety now rests in the man armed with a sword who said, "No, God is for God." And then it says, she has lived in Israel to this day. Now turn to Matthew 1. Matthew 1:1. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, and Ram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab. Another name, another woman of ill repute who shows up in the lineage of Christ to remind us that God is for God. He is not for fame or royalty of mankind. He's not looking for his perfect, spotless pedigree. He's not just for the Jewish people. Some scholars have even speculated that Salmon, Rahab's husband, who she marries after she lives in Israel, was one of the spies. That it's likely he was one of the men who went in and rescued her. Now, Salmon was a prince of the house of Judah. Rahab, the prostitute, marries into one of the leading families of Israel. We don't get many other details, but we can know this. Salmon saw something in Rahab that was beautiful beyond what the human eye sees. He redeems her. Rahab, who has known many men, but no men have truly known her. Rahab, who has seen her body used, but never preserved. Rahab, who kept her heart from men for years, now has a literal prince choosing her. She isn't just simply rescued, she is redeemed, and she is in the family of Christ and honored among those named in his lineage. Rahab is the mother of Boaz, who we will learn about next week. And I don't want to give away too much, but we see in Boaz remarkable faith, remarkable character, remarkable honoring of foreign women. A boy learns these things from not just his dad, but his mom. John Bloom wrote, "Imagine the stories Boaz heard as he grew up, and imagine how having a mother who had been a foreigner and a harlot, yet was grafted into the olive tree of Israel by the grace of God, affected the way that Boaz viewed Ruth that day he saw her gleaning in his field and discovered who she was. Other men might have simply seen a foreign woman scrounging for food like a parasite, but Boaz saw something familiar and dear in a woman who had left her family, left her nation and her gods to embrace Naomi, her nation, and her God." I'm getting ahead of myself. Ruth is next week, and it's going to be really good. So that's a teaser, and you should come. But we see this legacy continuing, a legacy continuing from Eve to Hagar, who is seen by God despite her foreign pedigree and shame, Tamar, whose name is in the lineage of Christ, to the Hebrew midwives who lied to protect the Hebrews, now to Rahab, who carries on this legacy from all of these women, a legacy not to shine up her own crown or her own pedigree, but to point to God. Rahab, who takes refuge in a house that is marked with scarlet. Rahab, who tells her family, "If you hide in here, you're safe." We see this picture of Christ who says we must take refuge in him for protection. We must be marked with his blood. It isn't enough for the people of Jericho to say, "Oh yeah, I know that Rahab. Nice lady, good person." It isn't even enough to know where she lives. "Oh yeah, I've been to her house once or twice. She'd know who I was." And it isn't even enough to make our own scarlet cords to hang from windows. It's not simply enough to know about Christ or to know that he offers protection. We have to actually hide ourselves in him. We have to actually take refuge in him. And to what credit can Rahab and her family actually claim? They fought off no one. They did nothing of their own willpower. They were spared death because of grace from the spies through the faith of Rahab, who believed in God. And Rahab redeemed. Christ, who offers us redemption and adoption into a nation, gives us a future and a legacy through him, one that we could never obtain on our own. You know, so far we've learned about two women that are in Christ's lineage, Tamar and Rahab, two women who God chooses to be a part of his family. And I can't help but think that God is showing us who his bride is. See these unexpected brides? See their stains and their errors, their sins, their folly, their pain, their fears. See how I took them from dust to royalty? This is my bride. And the church is the bride of Christ, you and me, Grace Road, believers around the world. We are not the heroes of the faith. We are not the royalty who make the pedigree of Christ shine. We are the unexpected names, the fearful ones, the sinful ones, the stained ones, the ones with scarlet hanging out of our windows, hoping that someone remembers the covenant they made with us. And Jesus has our name on his lips, protecting us from certain death forever. We, the redeemed, rescued, unlikely, forgiven, covered, secured, and then promoted to the royal family as Rahab was. We are the bride of Christ. I want to end tonight by reading you a poem that John Piper wrote about Rahab. And I thought it was beautiful, so I want to share it with you before we close in worship. Her velvet sleeves lay motionless and limp against the scarlet dress. A half-said word hung still and thin between her frozen lips, and in the distance she could hear the screams of men whose adolescent dreams she metamorphosed into sin, converting fantasy to skin. No blinking now from bark-brown eyes, but only blankness while the skies above the city fill with smoke from burning wives who used to stoke the supper stove and wait for men who didn't come, allured again by Rahab to the harlot's bed. They'd sworn to see her dead. But now, as always, there she stood, as far from burning as she could, and thought about 1,000 nights when she had watched the flames and flights of passion in her patron's play, but kept her heart a mile away. She watched until the sun went down and all of Jericho's renown blew southward to the salted sea. Then, terrified and fearfully, she fell and spread her hands and face upon the ground, and to abase herself, she scooped the dust and dirt and threw it on her head and skirt until the last of strength was gone. And then she wept until the dawn and choked out words repeatedly. Why was I spared? Why me? Why me? At dawn, she heard a Jewish voice. 'Tis good to weep and not rejoice. The sorrow first, and then the song. The words of Joshua were strong. Now rise and go down to the stream and make you clean. This is no dream. The answer to your cry, why me? The God of Abraham is free. His sun is rising in the east. The priests have made for us a feast. Go, make you clean, and come with me. There is another way to be. And Rahab made her face to shine and took her place before the shrine.